Thank you. Yeah. Okay, time for a virtual group hug. Good morning. Well, it's graduation season, which is why I chose the title of higher education, which usually refers to, college and beyond, but from a spiritual perspective, there seems to be the earthly education that we need to get, and then the higher education starts to kick in. I remember in Chicago, where I grew up, you had 8 years of grammar school and 4 years of high school. So at the 8th grade graduation, someone pointed out how it was being called commencement, but commencement actually means the beginning of something new. And we all have had the experience of working our way through the grades, kindergarten, first grade, second grade, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we recognize the progressive learning that we made. And, of course, a lot of times 2 steps forward, 1 step back, whatever. But we recognize it would not have been wise for us to jump from first grade into 9th grade. We needed to take things in a sequence. I'm going to have Duncan put up a slide. Abraham Maslow was a psychologist. He actually passed away back in 1970. But he came up with a hierarchy of needs, things that we need to learn before we can move on up the chart here. You see at the bottom, there's number 1, and that's physical survival. That's the first thing we need to learn in the physical world and have that need met, that, okay, there's a physical survival. We don't feel like we have to have, any danger in our life or whatever like that. Then comes that aspect of safety. Okay, I feel safe, I've got housing, I got food, etc. And then once that's taken care of, you can feel belonging, whether it's a family or any other group or like a Unity Spiritual Center. And then you can express love to each other in appropriate ways. Then you can get into the higher stuff, like, esteem, respect of self, respect of others. And then at the top of Maslow's original list was self-actualization, but then later they talked about self-transcendent. But that's that sense where you really recognize that you don't need to be more spiritual. You can be spiritual beings having a human experience. And I'm going to have Duncan put up the next slide. So yeah, there's the wisdom of experience. 2 of the greatest qualities they have in life are patience and wisdom. When Carla and I were living up in Chicago with my brother at the end of last year, they were out in the suburbs and they had skunks in their neighborhood. And one of their dogs, while we were there, over the period we were there, he got skunked 3 times. So if he began to learn that he needed to back off. So he did. But each of us need to, work our way through those basic need aspects. And, and many of us had very challenging, to say at the least, childhoods. So perhaps, I know though, even as a kid, in my grammar school, there'd be times where I'd have those spiritual inklings or spiritual thoughts or spiritual insights that would just bubble up. The realization that what I'm seeing is not all there is, and that perhaps, there are things that are vibrating energy that are rising up for me to sit on, so to speak, in a pew or a chair, that there's just vibrating energy and everything. This was before I even understood those kinds of physics concepts. But life is a lot like a classroom. We learn our lessons, and we think we got it down, but then something will happen, we don't have it down. But eventually something stirs within that causes us to really start to have our spiritual exploration. I think anybody who's come into a Unity Spiritual Center anywhere in the country, recognizes, like, yeah, wow. And it's interesting because some people I went to a seminar last year. This church consultant, Ken Callahan, was talking about, how so many churches are still in that mindset of like the 60s and 70s, the people like to just church shop, and then find the place they like the best. He says, there are still people who do that. He says, but mainly people who do come to a church or a spiritual center come because they're having a crisis in their life, and they're trying to figure out how to deal with it. And that was what it was like for me. In 1986, I was going through a divorce, and I was feeling depressed, suicidal, and I just started needing to understand spirituality. And I met Carla, and sure enough, one thing led to another, and someone suggested we go to Unity in Chicago right near the beginning of 1987, and it was kind of like, wow. Having grown up Catholic, and then my first wife was Jewish, so I'd had those kind of paradigms, but suddenly, oh, okay, I get it. And I was just like a sponge wanting to learn everything I could about Unity. And it's and you hear so many people, and even, I was saying that back in 1987. It's like, why didn't I learn this sooner? Why didn't I discover Unity sooner? I could have had a lot less pain in my life, a lot less unpleasant experiences. Well, there's an old saying, it's used a lot in Unity, but it's traced back to Confucius, and that is, when the student is ready, the teacher appears. No person who is truly ready to receive spiritual guidance or spiritual philosophy like we have. Conversely, if you're not ready, it's not going to take. When Carla and I went through seminary, one of our classmates was a woman who's, they described about how her husband and her just couldn't agree on, coming to a Unity church. She liked to come to this Unity church in the Kansas City area, and he just thought it was all kind of woo-woo, airy-fairy stuff. That was his attitude. But then they started having a real crisis in their marriage because, she was kind of just outpacing him as far as growth and consciousness. And they ended up separating for a while, and it was at that point that he finally came back, and suddenly he was hearing things that he never heard before in the Unity Church, just simply because he didn't have the ears to hear. But once he had the ears to hear, he became a strong partner with her. When she graduated, she decided to start a new congregation, and he was her music director. He knew how to play the guitar, and finally got that, this could be his role in her ministry. One of the things we also see at Unity Church is that people want their children to learn all these Unity principles as early as possible. And we do. We give age-appropriate spiritual lessons, to the youth and family ministry, any of the children that come in between, from infants on, to people who are just finishing high school. But there's this assumption that by helping them learn these things early, that they'll release or won't have to have any unpleasantness in their life. But I don't know about you, for me, I found a lot of the unpleasantness is the stuff that I learned the most from. I mentioned how, Carla and I, started seeing each other when we started living together in 1987. And we're in this condo building in Chicago, 29 floors. We live on the 20th floor. And I'm on the elevator one day. You get to know people, but just, happening to see them on the elevator. And all of a sudden this woman gets on the elevator, and I just, she looks so much like my ex-wife. And I was kind of like, ooh, I'd strike up a conversation with her and all that. And, as times would see her, though, I saw it was almost kind of like a spiritual litmus test, that sense of, have I gotten over this yet? Have I gotten over the guilt? Have I gotten over the pain? Have I processed the divorce to the point that I can really, freely move forward? And I'd watch over the years, and met her husband, and they had to end up having 2 children. About 8 years later, she gets onto the elevator, as I'm on the elevator, and she's crying. And I said, what's wrong? And she says, my husband left me. He ran off with his secretary. What am I going to do? Of course, my heart and compassion went out to her, and I was thinking, oh, wow, that's really got to be painful. And and in my mind, I'm thinking, nobody should have to go through that kind of pain. And then it hit me. It's like, wait a minute. I went through this kind of pain, and it changed my life for the better. If I had continued down that old road, if I hadn't gotten divorced from my first wife, all of the things that happened after 1986 might not have happened to me. And so in my mind, I'm thinking to myself, everybody should have to go through that kind of pain, but I didn't say that to her. But it was a sense of, yeah, these are the things that happen. And a lot of people do discover unity because of a crisis that comes in their life. So a crisis in health or occupation, relationships, finances, spiritual growth. And of course, if we embrace unity, we're not done. We're learning new things. We're having new experiences. We, of course, try to follow the teachings of Jesus the best we can. And there are several places in the Gospels where Jesus mentions a higher teaching that the people aren't ready for yet. In the Gospel of John, 4th chapter, 32nd verse, meanwhile the disciples besought Jesus, saying, "Rabbi, eat." But he said to them, "I have food to eat of which you do not know." Later in the Gospel of John, 16th chapter, he says, "I have yet many things to say to you, but you cannot bear them now. When the Spirit of truth comes, he will guide you into all truth." And so when you look at these things, you think, well, what is it that he wanted to teach? Did we miss something? I don't think we did. In the Gospel of Matthew, 5th chapter, 6th chapter, 7th chapter, there's a dissertation of Jesus. It's called the Sermon on the Mount, by people who are familiar with it, where it seems to be just a good overview of Jesus' teachings. And Bible scholars and Bible students wondered, did Jesus really give all of these things at the same time in the same lecture, so to speak? Or was this just a compilation of his teachings? In the 7th chapter, as he's wrapping up and hitting the home stretch of this, he says in the Gospel of John, 7th chapter, 7th verse, "Ask, and it will be given to you. Seek, and you will find. Knock, and it will be opened to you. For everyone who asks receives, and he who seeks finds, and to him who knocks it will be opened." You notice he said, "For everyone who asks." He doesn't say, "For anyone who's spent 10 years in Unity and taken these courses, then you can ask." Everyone asks. I don't know about you, but I'm a Unity minister, and I still haven't gotten this down. Yet it just, on the face of it, it just looks too simple. Yet the greatest truths in this world and in spirit are simple. When we have needs, or when I have needs, do I immediately remember that I just need to go within and ask for the guidance? There was a wonderful professor at Unity Seminary, Ed Rabel, who's long since passed away, but he came up with a couple of tests that you could run just to see, have you really gotten to that point where you can do it? And the first one he said is, when you pray for healing, do you feel like you need to list all of the illnesses and symptoms? Or do you just pray for healing, knowing that the divine idea of perfect health is what I need to embrace or another needs to embrace? When things are going wrong with my life, do I feel like I need to, in prayer, spell out for God all the things that are going wrong in my life? Or am I just willing to say, okay, God, what is right and what is best in this situation? When I'm complaining about another's shortcomings or another person's spiritual awareness, or am I willing to just ask God to guide me, to see that Christ presence in the other person? Recognize they may be struggling something, but maybe the problem is that I'm just not perceiving them the right way, or I'm standing in judgment or condemnation of them. And then when I get all emotionally wrapped up in one thing or another, can I look and see, is it just that I'm too emotionally attached to my preferences? That there might be a better way? So we get our earthly education and we get our higher spiritual education, and we're working on them both all of the time. They never end. We may not see the changes in the world around us that we want, but what happens is we change. We change through our own spiritual awareness. This is what Jesus meant by being born again. We reach a whole new level of understanding. It's almost like we emerge from that old skin or that old way of thinking into a new way of thinking. We move forward, 2 steps forward, 1 step back at times, but we keep going. And challenges come into our life, and that's good. if we didn't have challenges in our life, like I said last week, okay, do you want to be the brightest vegetable in the world, or do you want to go out there and get the spiritual growth that the universe is ready to coach you on? When the student is ready, the teacher appears. In the letter to the Romans, 8th chapter, 28th verse, Paul wrote, "We know that in everything God works for good with those who love God, who are called according to God's purpose." I'm going to have Duncan put up the slide. Each week I give you takeaways, and so this week's takeaways should be pretty obvious. Everyone who asks receives, and he who seeks finds. And to him who knocks it will be opened. Like I said, I haven't mastered this myself, but these, I think, are the highest teachings of Jesus, getting to that point where we can look beyond the physical appearances and feel worthy, and not allow ourselves to be talked out of something we deep down know needs to be done. Because it can be so easy. I mean, society and our upbringing and our earthly education talks about the way things are, and yeah, but what about the way things could be or should be? Am I willing to move past that old idea? Our closing story video is about a woman who had an awakening to perhaps a different method of crisis.